In 2023, we celebrated our third anniversary with Yvette Lisa Ndlovu's debut short story collection, Drinking from Graveyard Wells. Her book captivated us as she worked magic, death, and time travel into stories that explain themes of family, citizenship, and autonomy. Yvette's collection grapples with her country's future, with stories that reflect Zimbabwe's past under the ruling thumb of the former dictator Mugabe. We talk with Ndlovu about the women in her stories being able to harness power and death, gentrification, and the sacrifices made when giving up home for citizenship in another country. Stay with us for another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. Are you currently looking for a bookstore that has a great selection of books? Well, Kizzy's Books and More is that bookstore. Visit www.kizzy'sbooksandmore.com to purchase your next book for our book club. Use coupon code VulgarGenius to receive 10% off the subtotal of your first order. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. We are your hosts.
My name is Denny.
And I am Veronica. And today we are joined by our April anniversary book of the month author. She is amazing. The book is amazing. We can't wait for you to get into it.
Yes. And we're so happy that we chose this for April because I think this is a combination of me and Veronica's favorite genres.
Yes, we got a little social horror.
A
little spec fic in there.
Yes.
Some sci-fi for Denny. She loves all of that good stuff.
Yes.
And
I don't live in the real world. I live in somewhere else.
I love that.
Yvette Lisa Ndlovu is a Zimbabwean storyteller. Her debut short story collection, Drinking from Graveyard Wells from University Press of Kentucky, was selected for the 2021 UPK New Poetry and Prose Series. She is pursuing her MFA at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she teaches in the writing program. She has taught at Clarion West Writers Workshop online and earned her BA at Cornell University. Her work has been supported by fellowships from the Tin House Workshop, Bread Loaf Writers Workshop, and the New York State Summer Writers Institute. Yvette, thank you so much for joining us on this show. We're so excited to talk about your book. This is really difficult for us because most of the time we're talking to people and their books had just come out, but your book does not come out. We're actually talking in March, y'all. Her book drops tomorrow for the whole world to see. OMG. So this is a very special moment to be able to talk to you on the brink of everybody knowing your name. So just thank you so much for joining us. But before we start gushing all over your book, we are going to just warm up those conversation bones with you and start off with some questions.
Some fun questions. So while we're trying to do your research, I always like to see, what's going on, what's happening in your life, just minor stuff. So we found out that you have a YouTube channel. When is it coming back?
Uh-oh.
She wasn't ready for that
one.
Like baby Yvette is there, like spitting out poems, spitting the truth, educating
so
people.
Funny and embarrassing at the same time. No. So yeah, I think I had that YouTube, I think, when I was a teenager, and also a little bit in undergrad. So I was doing spoken word poetry, very much into the spoken word scene. And I haven't done spoken word poetry in so long now. But yeah, maybe I should. You should get back into it. But I do have a TikTok now. So I think that's kind of like YouTube, but shorter. Yeah, that's so funny that you found that. I should go delete those videos.
That's a time capsule right there for
No.
everybody to go back and look at.
Please don't. I don't know. I loved it. I'm like, oh my God, this is the beginnings. When thinking of ancestors, who or what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think of the writers that came before me and also the women that came before me. I think is coming from a lineage of women who are doing the thing and passing on traditions and keeping everybody safe. So I think a lot about the women in my family and what they have done for the present.
Mm-hmm. What reminds you of Zimbabwe?
Rooibos tea. It's very special there, and there's a lot of like debates about not putting milk. So you see Twitter fights where they say, oh, somebody put milk in the rooibos tea, off with their head, Dale. So, yeah, I'm very protective of rooibos tea. Like I went to a cafe recently out here, and they did have milk and boba in the rooibos, and I was like, my my Southern African Zimbabwean self is coming out, but I actually enjoyed the rooibos boba tea, so I'm like, shit, maybe I need to try that. Yeah, but I'll never admit it to anyone back home.
Yes, this is the time where they need to like put the volume down. I do love the tea. I like to drink tea before I loved coffee. And that tea is good. So do you just drink it straight?
Yeah, I just drink it straight. Like make sure like the red can show up in the class, that red in the cup, red color. Yeah.
This is also controversial. Do you like it hot or like iced?
Hot. Don't let anybody hear you say cold.
Yes, I'm on the other side because I don't know. I make up rules, but anyway. This is a question from Veronica. You have the cutest outfits. What are you planning to wear tomorrow when your book is finally out in the world for everyone to read?
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, this was the crisis today. So my sister came. She just arrived in America, and we went to the mall to find an outfit because I'd been so stressed out and busy that I didn't have the chance to probably plan out an outfit. So we kind of had a girl time today to look for an outfit. But I do have earrings that are shaped like my book cover, so that's exciting that I got those in time.
That's really cute.
The whole book or just the pic?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can show you. They're like right here. I know the listeners will not be able to see, but
that is so cute.
They're the actual cover for the book.
Yeah.
That's so cute.
Oh yeah, girl, you might have to sell that on your website.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Get a copy of the book with a pair of earrings.
Yes.
There you go. There you go.
What has your favorite place that you have traveled to?
I think Puerto Rico. I just loved it because I haven't been, back home in 5 years now. And when I went to Puerto Rico, it felt very much like home for me. So I think just being there, I kind of felt grounded. I felt the culture, and I felt like I was back in Zimbabwe. So I think that has been like my favorite place in, I guess, like the USA so far.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to visit in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, San Juan and Old San Juan, and then we did the rainforest, El Yunque, which was really good. Got lost and muddy, but it was really beautiful.
Puerto Rico is definitely lovely. I did that for my 33rd birthday, so yeah, it's a beautiful country.
So before we begin, we would like you to tell our listeners what your book is about and like just a quick synopsis of what your debut novel is.
Yeah, so Drinking from Graveyard Wells is a genre-bending collection that blurs the lines between realism, social horror, fantasy, some Afro-surrealism and Afrofuturism in there, to tell the story of Black women, vengeful spirits, and monsters taking on the patriarchy and capitalism. And a lot of it explores the lives of Zimbabwean women living under the Mugabe dictatorship, which was a brutal, long dictatorship that ended in 2017, but was replaced by another dictatorship. So those stories kind of like use social horror and elements of the absurd to explore what it is like to be a woman under that system and under capitalism and patriarchy in general.
Yeah, this book is so good.
Thank
Look,
you.
this book is so good. I think I love short stories. Veronica knows that. And I'm so happy that this is what we chose for our anniversary. Because I think it, like we told you earlier, it encapsulates like the stuff that we really love in literature. You know, we just don't like to read, you know, just for, of course, there is that part of pleasure, but I think we read to further educate ourselves. So, like, how big the world is and how maybe all of our experiences a little bit different, but also the same. And, you know, like it humanizes people and it's like a window to everybody's life. But the themes in your book are wonderful. We love these kinds of things around here. You made it into a way where it's digestible, it's funny, it's sad, but then, you know, every time you finish a story, you're like, huh, I wish there was more, first of all. But it was a wonderful experience. So we start, you know, diving into the book. To me, women were, you know, the highlight of these stories. It is their lived experiences that these stories were attached to. How important that your stories mostly center on these extraordinary pillars of Zimbabwean life.
Yeah, you know, I mostly have been writing in Afro-Surrealism, which explores the, you know, absurdity of being a Black person in the world in general. I think Get Out is, I think, like is the best example of Afro-Surrealism, where Jordan Peele is using the sunken place to explore the legacy of racism and slavery in America. So for me, I was using that space to explore the absurdity of being a woman, especially under a brutal dictatorship. So a lot of the stories kind of, you know, deal with that. I have one story where the woman is a ghost who's speaking from beyond the grave, and kind of like exploring, you know, the question of who has ownership of Black women's bodies even in death. So a lot of the stories really like capture the experiences of women.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that comes to my next question. Because when your book was sent to us to, you know, just to be considered as a, you know, as a galley, we're looking at it, and the very first line in the back cover, it said, "Even in death, who has ownership over Black women's body?" And it hooked us immediately, because I was like, oh, okay, I want to know what this book is about, right? And it really, when upon reading it, it took me to Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And the main character, Janie, her grandmother, is having a conversation in the very beginning about where women's place is. And she basically tells her that women are the mule of the world. And so you touch on the many aspects of how womanhood is stripped away throughout this entire collection. What do you want to say about the autonomy within these stories, about not just the Black woman's body, but just the Black body in general, and what it means to have ownership of self and then have someone take it away?
Yeah. So I'm just thinking of one of the stories in the collection, which is Red Cloth, White Giraffe. And in that story, I explore the tradition of the bride price, or dowry, where when a woman gets married, her husband has to pay a certain amount to her family in order for that that marriage to happen. And so what happens a lot is that some of these, because of capitalism, some of the prices of the dowry, the bride price, the lobola, are very exorbitant, that people cannot afford them. So a lot of people pay in installments. And what happens when a woman dies before the husband finishes paying the installments is that her family will not bury her, will refuse to bury her until all of that money is paid. So that story explores that these families kind of like have an embargo over her body until that money is paid. And I explore, what does that mean? You cannot, even move on to the afterlife because a man is, paying a certain amount of money for you. And, families do this where somebody's not buried for months because their bride price isn't complete. So, that story is, from the perspective of this dead character, and she's a ghost who's, looking at, the family, doing all these things, and the husband trying to find the money to pay. So, thinking about that, even in death, this woman does not have autonomy over her own body. Mm-hmm. And then, as the story progresses, she does kind of rebel against the system and, kind of refuses to partake in it. So I think the story, I was, both talking about the lack of autonomy and also women getting their agency and power through magic. And yeah, the ghost does, kind of get her revenge.
Yes.
The end.
Yeah, I really truly love all the revenge moments within this book. I'm just curious to know, when you sat down to write this particular collection, which story came first for you? Because I know some of them came at different times. They appeared at different places, as most short stories work. But when you were like, okay, I want this one to be included, which one did you automatically know, like, this got to be in there?
Yeah, definitely home became a thing with thorns. That's one that I wrote later. Yeah. So in that story, I'm exploring like the surreal experiences of being an immigrant. And so in this world, immigrants have to give up something that they love in order to become a citizen, in order to be allowed to stay. So you can give up body parts, you can give up family members, recipes, traditions, your memories, and different things. And that was just exploring, my own experiences, as a Zimbabwean living in America. And I have, relatives that live in South Africa, where there's a lot of xenophobia and Afrophobia. So like xenophobia that's targeted at Black immigrants specifically. So, thinking about that surreal experience of how much immigrants give up your language, give up your family in order to kind of get a little semblance of safety. And just, yeah, using horror to, the horror of giving up a body part to explore that experience.
I think what makes this conversation the most difficult for me is because your book is about to come out, and therefore we cannot have any spoilers. Because let me tell y'all, I would love to talk to anybody who has put their eyes to this book because of how much in depth that you go into when you're talking about these different class systems and what it is to be an immigrant and coming into another country and becoming a citizen, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But that particular story that you just mentioned is my favorite in the entire book. They're all good, but that one has a special place in my heart. That one is really good.
Yeah. that I felt, because I'm an immigrant, so that is like that's daily life.
Yeah.
In a much grandiose and palatable way for me to read. I have a bunch of favorite stories, even like, even the like the shorter stories. I'm like, what is happening? Did they just happen? But anyway, I can digress very easily. You talked about neo-colonialism, gentrification, erasure, patriarchy, and poverty in these short stories. Those are some of the greater themes that you dabbled on, and there's a lot more packed in this book. This makes people, for me, evaluate themselves and their lives that they're creating and the people that they are affecting. What conversations do you wish that people would have while reading this or after reading your work?
Oh, that's a really good question. I I think specifically, back home for Zimbabweans, I think kind of interrogating kind of like the patriarchal traditions. So for example, with the lobola. So, when people always ask me, what is my stance on, dowry and bride price and things like that, I always say, it's not a bad thing. It's just when there are these capitalist greed and patriarchy behind it that it becomes bad, because way back in the day, it wasn't a bad tradition. The dowry was just a small gift of thank you to the family. So you'd bring beer, you'd bring a bag of maize as a small thank you, a small token of appreciation. But I think with the modern society that we live in, it has become this capitalist thing where you have to pay thousands of dollars in dowry. So kind of interrogating our traditions, and how we can diverse from making traditions exploitative, I think. And seeing how women can suffer under some of these traditions, I think. So kind of stirring up those conversations, also stirring up conversations about the political systems. One of the stories in the collection is about an immortal leader who does not leave the seat of power, so he's in power forever. And I used that to explore, kind of like what was the absurd experience of living under a dictatorship. Because living under the Mugabe dictatorship, he was, I think, 96, and still a president. And I grew up thinking that he would never die. I grew up thinking that he was immortal because he'd been around for so long. He was this really larger than life figure. And that does something to you, And so even when he did pass away, I didn't believe it at first. I was like, no, this man is immortal. That cannot happen. So using something like immortality to kind of explore the absurdity of living under an authoritarian regime, and how we can use things like magic, fables, and fairy tales to really interrogate real world systems. So conversations about the politics back home, and women, and patriarchy is really important to me.
It really hit home for me in terms of looking at it from the broader scheme of when you're talking about the African diaspora, in terms of African Americans who were once enslaved people, right? And I was talking to Denny today about different traditions, and talking about the dowry and things like that, and what the rings mean, what the diamonds mean for you, and things of that nature. And it made me think about, like, okay, well, you have this culture that does this thing and another culture that does a thing. And then when you're talking about enslaved Black people not being allowed to enter into a marriage, that sometimes they had to take a partner in secret, and how those things so there's a whole nother system that is built into that, and then adopting this Western idea of, like, now you got to give a ring and ask the dad for the hand in marriage, or the mom, or whatever, and taking on something that never was meant for us, and then taking it on in a means of what it means for us to internalize those things of what is the cost of being with someone forever, and that transactional thing, or is it like a real thing, and all of those things that can be weighed in what you were touching on in this conversation. When we started Vulgar, it was all with with well intentions of reading literature written by people that look like us, right? And one thing that I've realized for myself, that in these interviews, when we talk about well-known authors such as Octavia E. Butler, who comes to mind when I'm reading your work, her work was something that I never cracked open, never even considered, didn't even know about until we started doing what it is that we're doing. And so in the scope of sci-fi and written by Black people into the future, who were the writers when you're looking at sci-fi and things like that, who were the writers that helped show you that you too can exist in this space between time and death, in these stories that you have written for us to read?
Yeah, and thank you so much for that question, because I didn't think that I and people like me could work in the fantasy sci-fi space. until I read the works of Leslie Nekarima. She has this gorgeous short story collection, What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky. And, it's she's a Nigerian author. Most of the stories are set in Nigeria. They're Afrofuturists, they're weird, there's, all this stuff happening. And, until I read that, I was like, oh, I can do that. I can play with the myths back home, because we have so much myth, so much mythology, and I didn't know that I could put that in my work. So reading her work was transformational. Also, Nnedi Okorafor, who's done a lot of work. The first time that I read an African girl in space was her Binti trilogy, and the girl is from a Southern African tribe that I'm very familiar with, and so to see that this girl from the Himpa tribe up in space, I had never seen that before, and it was such a beautiful moment that we can have that. So just reading, just seeing yourself in work is so important, because I think a lot about like imagination, that without imagination you cannot even conceive of certain things. So to see an African girl, to see a Black girl in those spaces is so important. And going back to Afrofuturism, I always say people like Harriet Tubman were Afrofuturists because they could imagine a future where Black people were free. And because of that imagination, they worked towards making that future a possibility. So, Afrofuturism comes with imagination, imagining, liberty, imagining a different world for Black people. And once you have that imagination, you can have the action to back up that imagination. So seeing, writers like Nnedi Okorafor and Leslie Nekarima really sparked that interest for me to dip my toes into that space, and I haven't looked back ever since.
When did you discover sci-fi? For you, what age were you when you were like,
so I feel like sci-fi has like always been around, but I'd never really deeply engaged with it like when I was a teenager. But then when I got to college, then that's the first time that I read Nnedi Okorafor, Leslie Nekarima. That's when I was like, Black women are writing in this space. You can do this. So, that was really transformational. And, a lot of my early stories, I had, and a lot of Black writers talk about this, that a lot of your early stories have, white characters. Some of my stories, were set in England, because Zimbabwe is a former British colony. So a lot of the books that we read are by British authors. And so a lot of my stories were set in England. There was snow. I had never seen snow. Zimbabwe pretty much has all year round summer. So I was writing about snow, and I'd never seen that growing up in Zimbabwe in my life. And so so that's seeing people like you writing themselves into stories is so important, because I don't have to write about snow. I can write about my own things. And that's the beauty of reading forebears. And I'm glad that there's this explosion of Black speculative fiction, Afrofuturism, people rediscovering Octavia Butler, rediscovering all these writers. And Octavia Butler needs her flowers. And I'm glad they're finally getting them.
Forever and forever. Because we're always so busy like reading everything, and every time we have somebody on, they're bringing up Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Octavia, and I'm like, okay, it's time for me to like sit down and read something. And I read Kindred, and my mind was blown. I'm like, what the hell? Like, how is it that this was not a part of anything that I read when I was growing up in school?
The canon.
Like those things, like even when you're talking about just the Black canon in literature, was never brought. And I went to a predominantly Black high school, but we were dealing with teachers who were teaching a curriculum that did not show us at all. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I even touched and finding out who Zora Neale Hurston was. So when you find these books later in your life, and you're like, I wish I had known that they existed. And which shows why what we're doing is so important, to have writers like you who are writing these amazing stories that we want people to know about. And you mentioned about being over in Europe and writing about like snow and things like that. And it comes to my next question in terms of just America and its relationship with literature. It can be a very like self-centered one,
Mm.
and it misses out on investing reading time in stories that have narratives that take readers to a viewpoint centered in another country's culture, which you have given us today, a different viewpoint. So I'm just curious, what do you hope that readers will gain from reading books written by authors like yourself
Mm.
that are in America?
Mm. I think just, learning about different people and, what is going on outside the American context is super important. And just, reading widely, you can kind of get to see, something different, and also see like the connections, between people. It's interesting because I run a summer fellowship for Black writers called the Voodoo Knots Summer Fellowship. So we provide mentorship and classes for Black writers, and it's a very diverse group of students. So last year we had, and it's online. So we had Black students from Europe, Black students from South America, Black students from America, and from the African continent. And so it was so interesting to kind of see their diverse experiences of Blackness and also their similarities. And it's always a good conversation between these writers. So, we had a writer from Norway, and people were asking, how did you end up in Norway? Tell us that story. Like, what are Black people doing in Norway? Like, we want to know. And then one of the instructors of that year, it was a nonfiction workshop, and I sat in on it. And he had this like fun kind of icebreaker activity and he's American, and he said, oh, let's write a recipe for Kool-Aid. And so because it was a diverse international group, students from Africa and South America were like, oh, what's Kool-Aid? And then when he explained what Kool-Aid is, they're like, wait, we have that. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm from Zimbabwe, so our version of Kool-Aid is Jolly Juice. I was like, that sounds like Jolly Juice. It was an interesting like connection moment where it's like, wait, okay, so it's called Kool-Aid in America, Jolly Juice in Zimbabwe, something else in the Caribbean. So it was a fun moment where we were all creating stories around this, this product that has different names. So I think, that's what literature can do, that you can see that, oh, we have these similarities between us. And, it's not just about the differences, but the connections you can make with people. And I think working with Voodoo Knots and getting this, diverse experience of Blackness has really showed me that.
I'm glad you brought up Voodoo Knots. That's a question that I'm going to save for later. But I was just curious, is when you're having those conversations, has there ever been anything when you're talking to someone from another country that has sparked an idea that you're like, okay, I need to write this down and use it in a story because this is good, just from the conversations that you all are having?
Yeah, so actually, one of my co-founders is from Kenya, and we plan on co-writing a story about like a magical school where Black students come. So that's kind of like in the works, and we're kind of co-writing a different projects. But that's one of the things, is that you can kind of co-write, and when we're kind of talking about different things. So we have this public transportation system in Kenya. It's called matatu, and it's a different word, in Zimbabwe. So we're like, oh, that's nice. We can have like a matatu, and because we've kind of experienced, similar things, and it goes between, it can teleport. It doesn't. There are no borders in its ways, and thinking about those kinds of things, it's been really, really fun, kind of getting the Kenyan experience and the Zimbabwean experience and different things thrown in there. So it's like a melting pot of different things.
I bet that's so much
Yes,
fun.
with you writing it, it'd probably be really good. So, like what you were saying, about your Kool-Aid story, your form of storytelling tapped the places in my heart that make me miss home. I think the same feeling that when you went to Puerto Rico, I think it's like the same feeling when I had when I was reading your book. Because I'm like, I'm Asian. I'm from the Philippines. Zimbabwe is very, very far from where I live. But when I was reading your stories, I'm like, oh, this feels like a story that an auntie or a grandma would tell me, like, while I'm hanging out with them making some food. Like that's how your stories felt when I was reading it. So
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's the truth, because I think I read like an article where like people were saying like it might be like too preachy or too blunt, like whatever you're writing in your story. But
Yeah.
to me it was comforting and it was familiar. I have
Mm.
recognized that your gift of making these stories concrete on paper is a very important aspect in preserving culture and identity. You have this ability to make, the fantastical humane and vice versa. um I know you touched a little bit about this earlier, but can you talk more on how you used surrealism to
Mm.
guide you into writing, you know, the other parts of your book?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So like I mentioned, Afro surrealism really leans into the absurdity of just being a Black person in this world. So one of the stories, which this is the title story, Drinking from Graveyard Wells, explores neo-colonialism, gentrification, and erasure, through a neighborhood where houses start disappearing. So the neighborhood gossip wakes up one day and her neighbor's house has disappeared, and she's kind of trying to figure out, what happened. And every night a new house disappears. And I use that to explore, gentrification and neo-colonialism back home. And then they kind of have, theories about why the houses are disappearing in the community. And I think a lot about, what communities are not heard and listened to, that a whole community can disappear and nobody bats an eye and nobody notices and nobody cares. How does that happen? And even though houses don't physically disappear in the real world, you know there's so much violence that happens to certain communities. There's so much erasure that happens and nobody bats an eye. So I was using the disappearing houses to explore, those real world issues of, communities that are completely disregarded, where
Mhm.
an entire neighborhood could disappear and nobody cares where
Mm.
they went to and how this is happening.
Right. And I think when I read that book, I'm like, I've never read a story that talks about these heavy stuff or these, like, topics in this form. I'm like, nobody had made a house disappear, because every, like, we all have that, it's a typical neighborhood where you have those, we call it in the Philippines chismosa, with the people that like to gossip, like their breakfast is a little bit of gossip and
Yeah.
coffee, and they know about who came home late, who is cheating
Mhm.
on what, and
Exactly.
who is pregnant again. They know everybody. And then I'm like, oh my God, this, like just the beginning of the story. And like then there's always like these like protagonists that wanna change that what's happening around them, just want to get out from there. And then it's so much layer in this story. That I really, really was like, dang, she did that.
But we love the busybody aunties, though.
Yes. No,
Always in your business.
a community would not survive without them. There would be no spice in
Mhm.
the community without them. But
Yeah.
like, what, I guess just a follow-up question. You mentioned this story. Why was that like the title of the book? Why was
Mm.
that, why was that the, I guess, the like the forebear of, like, this torch? I'm like, yes, I'm gonna present you this book.
Yeah. I think one thing I noticed when I was, curating the collection is that there are a lot of people speaking from beyond the grave in this
Mm.
collection. Lots of ancestors, lots of people in, I guess, like a purgatory liminal space. And so I think that title really captured kind of like these voices speaking from beyond the grave. And actually, the original title of the collection was "Swimming with Crocodiles," which is one of the stories. It's now a realist story in the collection. And then ultimately, we went with "Drinking from Graveyard Wells."
That's such a good title.
Yes.
That's such a good title. So recently I was watching an interview with writer Jason Reynolds, and
Oh,
he
yeah.
was discussing the importance of documenting life in the written manner, like a handwritten letter. He was saying that we live in a generation now where everything is digitized, And so there isn't going to be anything left because we're not sending each other letters, we're sending each other emails. And eventually Google will say your drive is too full, you need to delete something, and poof, those letters will be gone. So when you look back on your life and what you want to leave behind in the archives of Black literature, what is one thing that you have now that you would want people to see and learn about you outside of the books that you have and will write in the years to come?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah. That's making me think. So I went to Oakland, California, and they had an Octavia Butler exhibit. And so I saw her handwritten journal notes where she was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. And then at the end it said, so be it, see to it. And I thought that was really powerful, that she was kind of making the world in this way. And it was, in her handwriting, and I love that. So I have been thinking a lot about archiving and journaling. So I think, what do I want to leave behind? I think for me, it's a project like Voodoo Knots, actually, where we're bringing together all these different writers, and it came out of so I co-founded with Shingai, who's a brilliant writer. Her novella, and This Is How to Stay Alive, is a time travel novella that uses this East African conceptualization of time, which I can spend a whole hour ranting about. And she was, doing her MFA at Brown, and she felt, really lonely. There were not a lot of POC and Black students at that on that campus, and I was here in Massachusetts. So we kind of talked about what would it be like to have a Black MFA, a Black workshop space where we could just be ourselves, not have to worry about translating, not have to worry about code switching or anything like that. And we're like, why don't we make it? And so it was born kind of like out of that loneliness in our respective programs. So I think for me, that's, kind of like the legacy that I want to leave behind, like a space where Black writers can come and grow and be in community with each other, find writing buddies, find their community. So yeah, I think, and I know that's not my writing, but that's like more community work, but that's kind of like what I want to leave behind, is kind of like leaving the door open for more people to come in is important for me.
And I think that's a beautiful answer, especially considering everything that you have within this collection that centers around the importance of community, right? So it would only be that's what you're like, I want to leave this sense of community because that's prevalent in what you're writing about. And the culture in which you come from, and the importance of knowing like it takes all of us in order for us to function, and not trying to do everything alone. And from that you can be able to birth all of these amazing stories. Home Became a Thing with Horns is a story that focuses on immigrants in an unknown country waiting to become citizens by going through a naturalization ceremony performed by a priest. To gain citizenship, one must have something removed by the priest, such as a language or a family, etc. This story takes this notion of one gaining full access to a new country as privilege and flips it over to show the rotting core of what is truly lost in this transaction. Will you speak more on this particular story and the role that religion plays into the stripping away of people's most prized possessions?
Yeah, so with that story, I was kind of thinking about my own experiences, and as well as friends and family, that immigration is such a debilitating experience, because it takes so much for you, and you have to constantly prove your humanity. You have to prove that that you're a good worker, that you've got the right papers, that you have all the finances, and everything has to be in order. And it's just so much that you're just like, okay, I'm just a human being, I don't need to prove all of this stuff. So I was thinking of giving up so much, and the religious aspect, where the place where the nationalization ceremonies happen is a cross between like a DMV and a church. and it's the naturalization priests that strip away something that you love. And I think about when people naturalize that you have to pledge allegiance to the new nation, and it almost feels like a cult.
Yeah.
Where you have to renounce your old homeland and embrace the new homeland. So I was thinking about that it kind of feels like this religious aspect where you're making a pledge to this new homeland, and that pledge is almost like a spell that binds you to that place. So I was thinking about this pledge of allegiance as a spell that strips something that you love, something that is essential, that is a part of your identity, in order for you to be embraced by this new place.
Yeah, because I was really thinking about it from the aspect of like when you're talking about people coming in and thinking that they've discovered a new country, right? So like in terms of like just America's history in itself of having pilgrims coming over on the Mayflower and bringing this religion with them. They're trying to run away from persecution, and they want to be able to be in a place to worship how they want, and then taking that same religion and imposing it in a deadly manner onto the indigenous people that lived here, right? And one of those things also brought to mind, like even in my family's own personal experience of my brother-in-law's grandfather was given up when he was a baby to a Catholic church in the Bahamas. And he's a baby. His name was Byron Clare, but because he did not have a Catholic name, they switched it and named him James Sweeting. And just having that like renaming of self, of like, your name is not good enough until you have this on you, and what that means, not only when you're seeing it play out in terms of just renaming somebody, but telling them that they can no longer perform the religious rituals that they brought from their own country, and all of those things that you see play out in terms of the history of the foundation of a country, right? And I really saw that through this story, and I was just thinking like, damn, like she wrote the hell out of this one, because of your way to really stretch out this dynamic. There's so many different layers, because you could take it from just you trying to be a part of another country, period, just a regular way, and then you are taking it to the religious route, and then stripping it down to like what is going to be physically stripped from you, that will make you, like you say, almost like cult wise, become one and just accept this loss, right? And nobody who has the privilege of being a citizen from birth realizes what gets taken away from somebody until they lay it out of like, it's money, it's family not being seen for many years. It's that possibility of never even seeing them ever again, of what it is that you were so easily born into. And I love what you did with this story.
Yeah, thank you. And you lose your language, your culture, your food, and those are some of the things that the priest can take away from you. And that's something that happens with assimilation is, you put away your recipes, you put away your language in order to be embraced by this new place. And that's an entire lineage gone of recipes that have been passed down, gone entirely. So I was thinking about that, of what is lost when in immigrating.
Yeah when I read that particular story, it almost kind of brought me back to when I did it myself. I was in my early 20s when I did it. And when you're young and kind of like living in this bubble, because like it has been drilled in your head for so long that this is the goal, right? The goal is to be naturalized. The goal is to be just part of this thing. But nobody told me like, oh, with this thing, like, I don't know, for some reason in my head, I thought I can be like, yeah, I can be naturalized, but I can still keep myself being Filipino. And I struggled with that, I think, for the longest time, because it almost felt like, so what does it mean to be now me? Because then when I'm here, I can say that I'm American, but America doesn't think I'm
American.
it.
Enough, yeah.
So it was a very long process that at times I still struggle with. Like we talked to like Asian authors that made like this book called Rice, and I told them it has come a long time since I can call myself Asian American, because when people would ask me, what are you, I'm like, I'm Filipino. It's so hard for me to say that I'm American, because I never felt like, oh yeah, because you work here, and you always have to be good, you have to make sure that the space that was given to you, you actually deserve it 10 times like more than somebody that was born here. So when I was reading your story, I was like, I almost thought, I'm like, well shit, what did I give up? Like, like it made me go back to that moment, and like made me analyze, like, is something that I gave up then because I was young, is that something I can like bring back? It almost feels like I'm struggling to like get connected to that basically that that line that was cut, because we're not allowed to, right? So yeah, I can talk about that story for an hour as well,
Which goes to show that your book makes us really, do some therapy on ourselves. Like it makes us go to work.
Oh yeah, that story was just born out of, like my own like frustrations and, about the process that, it's so exhausting and you give up so much. So I just kind of spewed it all on the page, just, and it was a form of therapy for myself, just, getting it all out of myself and having it on the page. And, I'm so glad that, reading the story for you also kind of, allowed you to, to process, what did I give up? I'm really glad to hear that, because writing it was that for me.
Yeah, and you can feel like the rage on the page, because I was, when like at the end when the character was stuttering, and I'm just like, if I could like come into the page like, you're this person, I would have done it. But anyway, I was just happy that it was presented to me, back to me, like, bounced back to me, and I can see it like almost in a bird's eye view of what that really is. And for people also to be like, this is what happens to the people that you say, go back to your country. Like, we would if we could, because we really want to, but this is the other side of the story that nobody talks about. So also your stories have integrated concepts of time. So, since I love sci-fi, I love the fantastical, you explained a concept of time here. You said that one of which is that there is no future, but only the now and the past. So we were just curious, and like, how does the concept of time kind of like pairs up with, the problem that is capitalism, that even in death, some of these people, in their stories are still paying off their debts.
Yeah. So, I talked about Shingai's novella, Shingai Kagunde's novella, and This Is How to Stay Alive. And her novella is, in conversation with that story about time. So her novella uses this East African conceptualization of time, that time is moving backwards and not forward. So as we age, we're moving towards the past, because we're all going to die. So you're moving towards towards a past and not a future. So you only have the present moment and the past. And so I was so fascinated by that conceptualization of time, that I used it to think about what are the in that story, what are the kind of like the female liberation war heroes that have been erased from history, and what would it look like for one of their descendants to go back to time, to use this conceptualization of time to go back and kind of bring them back into memory. Because one of the key aspects of that conceptualization of time is that you only truly die is when everybody who knows you has passed away. So there's nobody to remember you. There's no one with the memories to remember you. So I was thinking a lot about memory and about you know, all the, you know, the Black women that have contributed so much and they're not remembered in history. Their contributions are not written down. So what does it mean to kind of use memory to, you know, to bring it back and to kind of resurrect that ancestor in the present? So with that story, I was kind of, you know, thinking about that. And, you know, and Shingai is a character in that story. She kind of shows up to guide the character towards figuring out how to time travel. So, you know, through my conversations with Shingai, through reading her work, and that, you know, I really recommend that novella, And This Is How to Stay Alive, a lot. And that's kind of like what inspired my own thinking about time. And I will actually be in conversation with her tomorrow at the reading that's happening at the book launch. So I'm excited to talk about time with her. She's, you know, very, very very, very brilliant and has very interesting things to say about time.
Yeah, I think that because that concept, like we talked about this earlier. We first saw it like in this movie called Coco. It's this Disney movie where a little boy goes to the world of the dead, and so you know, he meets like these two characters where nobody kind of remembers, nobody offers to their like ofrenda, which is nobody remembers them on the Day of the Dead. And one of the characters actually, like, you know, vaporized in front of them because they said, yeah, when nobody remembers you, when nobody puts offerings on your ofrenda and remembers you on the Day of the Dead, you go into this other place. So that was the first time that I've known about that. And then reading the story, I'm like, oh, it's not only in one culture that it's found, but also in another. So, you know, there's this kind of like continuum of like, you know, I don't know, concepts and traditions that might not be particular to just one space.
It's funny to me sometimes when I'm reading a story and then there's different things that I might find like on social media or something in the news that relate to what it is that I'm reading. And recently there was a video of Bozoma St. John. She's an entrepreneur. Now she just released her own memoir, and her husband had passed away suddenly from a horrible illness, and they had a child together, and she was talking about what grief is. And so she says a lot of the times that when you are thinking about death and dying and grief, that a lot of people are thinking that you are grieving the person of the past, like, you know, like I won't get to, you know, have to remember this moment anymore, you know, like share this moment with this person. But she said it's more so of thinking about what was in the future of like the what could have been with that person, you know, like those memories. She's like, I have a daughter who will never get to know her father and not share those moments of, you know, like he's not walking her down the aisle or seeing her off to prom or whatever. And so like seeing how time played in that aspect of what grief is, in terms of also dealing with the grief that you see a lot of those characters deal with in this story, I really felt like you know, your play on the understanding of how time can work within this universe and how some people might see it, to really make someone sit down and just take notes on like where they are in their own personal walk in life and figure out like what they want to do while they're in the now and how they want that legacy to be, you know, in the future or if for their past or their past. You brought up the voodoo knots a few times throughout this conversation, so people have a good understanding of what it is that you created with these wonderful writers. I'm just curious, I want to know, how did this community, not that how it formed, but how did you all get to the writing an anthology together? It's called Reliving Mythology, and it came out, I think, what, in this past November?
Yeah, last year. Yeah, last
Yeah,
November.
talk to us about that book, that collection. How long did it take? Whose idea was it? The whole nine.
Yeah, Voodoo Knots, the organization, it started as a brainchild of me and Shingai, and then we brought on other writers. So we have two other co-founders. So that's UHD Hunter, who's a middle grade author. His book Futureland is an Afrofuturist, lovely book that I think if you have a little niece or nephew, like you need to get that book out for them, as well as LP Kindred, who's also a brilliant writer. So it's kind of like a 4-person show. And so, we've always wanted to do an anthology of each class of each cohort of fellows. So each year we have 25 fellows. And so we, worked to, curate these pieces from the fellows, as well as solicit some other stories from more established writers, and kind of curate their work. And for a lot of these writers, it was their first published work, so it was so kind of beautiful to see that, to see their work in print. So our long-term goal is to have an anthology for each class of fellows. So that was the class of 2020 for that anthology, and the next one would be class of 2021, the class of 2022 hopefully, and then 2023 when we have the summer fellowship this year. So it's just a collected work of each year's Black writers doing the thing, working with mythology. So I'm excited to see what the next anthology would look like with our class of 2021 fellows contributing to that.
Well, that was a wonderful find for me. We got to get our hands on that book. I want to be able to read not only your stories, but everyone else's contribution to that anthology. Because, if you are writing like this, I can only imagine the extent of what is within that book. So now we are at the point of our conversation. I feel like you probably are ready to answer. I feel it in my spirit. We would like to know, you got two choices, either your top 5 favorite books of all time, or the top 5 things that you are really excited about that you want people to know. It could be your friend's book, it could be a movie, your album you just listened to, a tea that you just drank, whatever. We want to know what it is that is like in your mind right now.
Yeah, can I do a mix and match of both?
Sure.
Yes. Yes, please.
Yeah, so top books, Chintu by Jennifer Makumbi. That book changed my life. Jennifer Makumbi is a Ugandan author. So this magical realist family saga that starts off in pre-colonial Uganda, and then to the modern world where this curse has been affecting this family for generations, even before colonization happened. So how each generation deals with this curse. And it's really, really beautiful prose. Just, that book changed my life, basically. So I think she deserves more hype. And, the reason why I really love that book as well is that she tried to get it published in the UK and the US as well. And they say that her book was too African to be publishable. And so she took her book to a Kenyan publisher, and it was published in Kenya. And then it became very successful. And that's when American and European publishers were like, oh, now we want to republish it in the US. But before it had been too African to publishable. So I always look at that book as inspiration that, yes, I want to write a book that's too African to be publishable. That doesn't, try to translate, that doesn't, try to code switch. It's just what it is, and it it makes people uncomfortable, and she did that. So that's one book that I really love. Some things that I guess I'm looking forward to, I keep mentioning Shingai's novella and This Is How to Stay Alive. That's definitely one. She's working on a novel now, so always look out for her work. It's really brilliant. I mentioned UHD Hunter's middle grade Afrofuturist book. It's called Futureland. It's about a theme park that it's kind of like what's that, Westworld. So you have this traveling theme park that's owned by a Black family, and so it's made its stop to Atlanta. So it flies to every city And so in the book, it has made it stop in Atlanta, and really fascinating things are going on. And I won't spoil it, but it's a good middle grade for nieces, nephews, even adults. I loved it, as an adult reading it. So it was definitely good to see that Afrofuturism, happening there in the middle grade space. What else am I excited about? I'm excited about the next Voodoo Knots. To see another class of fellows, to maybe work on another anthology, co-edit an anthology in the future. What TV shows have I been watching? That's coming out. I think there's a new Afro-surrealist social horror coming out. That's made by the creators of Atlanta.
Oh, Swarm.
Yes, Swarm. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be on Amazon Prime, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited for that. I'm gonna have my popcorn every time something, psychological thriller Afro surrealist comes out. I have to, I have to watch it. So yeah, that's another thing that I'm looking forward to.
Well, there you go. That's a solid list right there.
Yes. See, this sci-fi stuff, I can always read them, but it scares me when I watch it. So
Yeah.
Because I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I watched Get Out 2 years after it came out because I was too scared. So I was really late to the game.
she forced me to watch it. I'm like, is there a transcript? Can we just read it? I can read, but please don't make me, because it was hard to watch. I think it's the music that gets me.
The music makes the movie.
Yes, I think, because if it was just kind of like plain, I'm like, okay, I can get through this, but the music, man,
with the jump scares.
One thing that I do want to talk to you about before we let you go is the one story that dealt with the young woman who was just trying to basically find her way in this country and send money and things back to her family, and she was kind of like blessed with a little bit of luck.
Yes.
But it turned to be a bad thing for her. And it reminded me, because there's something that happens at the end of the story. I don't want to spoil it, but it reminded me of a video that I had seen, TikTok, Instagram, I don't know, but it was like this young man, I think either he gets hit by a car or whatever, he instantly goes to heaven, and one of his ancestors comes to greet him in heaven and say, all right, welcome, you're an ancestor now. He's like, what? How am I an ancestor? He's like, I'm not old. And he says, ancestors mean dead. So come on, now it's time to go do work. And he's like, I gotta do work too. So when I read that part of your story, I was like, yeah, I can definitely see how this video can go with this particular part of the story of like the struggle.
That scared me. That story scared me, because it's like, the overseas Filipino workers that would just send money, and then people think they have like this pot of gold that they're sitting on. When they go back to the Philippines, people think that
that they're rich,
that they're rich, that they can give out dollars or euros or whatever they're using that money for. And then also when they kind of like, sometimes there's some abuses that happens overseas, and like they get killed or they abuse and they die. And I'm like, that's where my mind went to. And then I'm like, oh no, what happens when wherever they go, like to the afterlife, or as ancestors. And I'm like, please tell me it's different.
Yeah.
that messed me up. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I'm just like,
I'm sorry, I apologize.
It's okay, but it's just kind of just made me like, you know what? I think it's time to it's time to move, do something else a little bit.
Oh no. Yeah, but I was thinking a lot of that expression, like ancestors working full time, because like usually when something happens, something good happens for somebody, you say, oh, their ancestors are working full time to make sure that something good happens to them. So I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, what if the afterlife is just another version of the world that we have? It's another capitalist systems where the ancestors have to be working full time in factories to allow you to have good fortune, in in your life. What does that mean? That, when you die, it's not resting in peace. It's just another more work and more the bonds.
I don't know, Yvette. Make it make sense.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry, because this is the kind of reaction. If people don't have this reaction, that's when I'm gonna be mad. Because I'm like, see what we gotta go through.
But it also made me think about like how the role of religion again in terms of like, just trying to make it, be it on this plane or the heavenly plane or wherever you are. And like with Black people and religion in America, you've just been taught like, we toil down here, but we'll have our crown when we reach heaven, right? And then you're just like, you read a story like that and you're like, oh Jesus.
Yeah, what if there's no rest? Like,
right. Well, Yvette, we would love to just like kidnap you and have you here and just like talk to you all night long, but we don't want to do that because we know you have a big day tomorrow. Yes. Congratulations on your upcoming release. We hope that you have a wonderful day. Just remember to just pause, breathe it in, look around, and just think about your baby is out in the world. And now soon you're going to have everybody asking you, when does the next one come? So
congratulations. Do a fit check, before
post that pic on Instagram. Let us know.
Thank you for gassing me out. Thank you.
Yeah, we wish we could be, in that same space where you would do this live, but we're very happy that you came onto the show the night before of your release. You could have been doing a million other things, but it's a great pleasure to talk to an author that kind of really gets it, that gets us. Yes. And the work that we try to do around here. So
yeah, thank you. And you are doing, lovely work to platform, BIPOC authors. And, I appreciate that. And I love doing interviews with, Black and brown creators, because like we can just have a natural conversation where you're asking really astute questions. And I appreciate that, not very basic 101 questions like, oh, what is Zimbabwe? Or, whatever. I really, really appreciate that, how you do your research, and like the conversation is just very enriching for me as well. So, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. And again, you rest easy. You have a wonderful day tomorrow and all the days to come. All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
This is so lovely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Our show has been produced and edited by Preston Long. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast.
Our theme song you've been nodding your head to is by Sean Kantrowitz. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Dammit. That's SeanDammit.
Follow us on Instagram at The Vulgar Geniuses.
Bye!